On Saturday, Wadea Al-Fayoume, a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy, was stabbed 26 times by his landlord in his Illinois home. The landlord also stabbed the child's mother more than a dozen times, though she is expected to survive. Detectives were able to determine that both victims were targeted because they were Muslim and due to the current conflict involving Hamas and the Israelis. Threats and threatening language are rising against both Muslim and Jewish communities. On Sunday, FBI Director Christopher Wray said there is an increase in reported threats inside the U.S. amid the war. Jews and Muslims alike, as well as their institutions and houses of worship, have been threatened. Joining me now is Mehdi Hasan, host of The Mehdi Hasan Show, and Michelle Goldberg, columnist for The New York Times. Her latest piece, The Massacre in Israel and the Need for a Decent Left, touches upon these complexities, in which she writes about the progressive Jewish community. Quote, "These are Jews who share the left's abhorrence of the occupation of Gaza and of the enormities inflicted upon it, which are only going to get worse if and when Israel invades. That the way keyboard radicals have condoned war crimes against Israelis have left many progressive Jews alienated from political communities they thought were their own." A great duo to speak with today. So I want to come back to that column and sit with that column for just a moment, Michelle, because it is excellent. I hope everyone reads it. But I want to go right back for just a moment, thank you, to this 6-year-old boy, Mehdi. I want to play Odai Al-Fayoume, and he is the dad. And this is what he had to say. Okay. Actually, it's not translated, so I'm going to read the translated version of it. So we're going to show him, but I'm going to tell you what he said, because he did not say it in English. "I'm here because I'm the father of the boy, not because I'm a political person or a religious person or anything. I'm here as the father of a child whose rights were taken from him. The issue of Hamas and Gaza are world issues, not pertaining to individual countries. I'm not big enough to speak of these things, and I hope that my son can be a means by which this issue can be fixed." Mehdi, talk about it just a moment, because it does feel in some ways like we are in a sort of a post-9/11 moment. And your thoughts on that and on the way the discourse has been unfolding.
In some ways worse than post-9/11, because you've got hate crimes against both communities. You've got hate in some ways imported from the Middle East into the United States against minority communities. And it's heartbreaking to hear a 6-year-old boy is killed in the Chicago area because of a foreign conflict, because of hate that arises out of a foreign conflict. This is a family, Joy, that fled from the West Bank, fled from the occupied Palestinian territories over a decade ago to get away from violence there, and they lost their son in the United States of America in 2023. It's absolutely horrific. And you have to ask the question, who wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to kill a kid today? I'm not just going to kill a kid, I'm going to stab the kid to death. And I'm not just going to stab them once or twice. Stabbed them 26 times. A 6-year-old boy. What kind of hate makes someone do that? It's not hate you're born with, Joy. It's hate you're taught. And I do not believe it was a coincidence that NBC News is reporting tonight that this alleged killer was an avid listener of conservative talk radio. We have heard some vicious and vile anti-Palestinian rhetoric in recent days from people like Tom Cotton, a Republican senator, saying, as far as he's concerned, Israel can bounce rubble in Gaza. Lindsey Graham saying Israel should level Gaza. Ron DeSantis saying everyone in Gaza is an anti-Semite and shouldn't be allowed into America as refugees. Marjorie Taylor Greene saying if you're pro-Palestinian, you're pro-Hamas. That is the kind of dehumanizing rhetoric. Some would say genocidal. What does it mean to flatten, level an area where 2 million people live? That is the kind of rhetoric that in many cases prompts people to acts of terror. Rhetoric leads to hate. Hate leads to violence.
Indeed. And I mean, I think, Michelle, your piece, to pick up on that point, for the Jewish community, who paraglides into a concert full of kids who are just listening to music and starts killing people, or, kidnaps an elderly peace activist. You know what I mean? Like, there is a sense, I think, for a lot of, Jewish Americans or Jewish folks who are watching this happen of, oh, my God, this pain is so raw, and yet we're now sort of also trying to encapsulate the pain of 2 million people in Gaza, and it's sort of all happening. But I feel like you boiled that down so well in your column, so I want to allow you to say more.
Yeah. Well, Thank you. I appreciate that. And I find those pictures of that boy so gutting. And I think that, what we're seeing right now is, it's not necessarily parallel or analogous, because what you're seeing on the left they don't have representation in Congress. These aren't people with political power. They might be people who have intellectual and cultural power. And I think it has been very, very painful for a lot of progressive Jews to see, both online and in real life, at certain demonstrations, people using, for example, the paraglider as a meme, people talking about these attacks as acts of anti-colonial liberation. And what I think is important to realize is that this is really the mirror image of the most hawkish and aggressive Israeli arguments. The idea that there is no such thing as a civilian in this conflict. The idea that the kind of evil of a group's leaders justify violence against them, that victimization which both sides on this conflict have in incomprehensible amounts, that victimization licenses savagery, that because of what Israel has gone through, anything that they do in Gaza is justified. That's the mirror image of the idea that because of what Gaza has gone through, these massacres are justified. And, I think Mehdi is absolutely right about the language coming from both voices on the American right. He spoke about some of the things that we have various senators who've said. I think it's important to note that line from Tom Cotton about bouncing the rubble, that is a reference to a Churchill quote about nuclear weapons, right? This is, he's really kind of talking about something truly horrific and exterminationist, frankly. And you also have this language coming from the Israeli right, which has left, many Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but in Israel proper and in the West Bank, terrified, fearing expulsion, fearing attack. And I think that, Americans, I think most American Jews are in a very raw place because this assault brings up memories of genocide. And it's unfair that people should be called when they're grieving this thing that happened to their own community to try to defend another community. But I think that for everyone's sake, that's what's really necessary right now.
Yeah, and, Mehdi, I think about the sort of ironies, having covered a lot of Ron DeSantis. This is somebody who was howling about George Soros not that long ago, which is an anti-Semitic meme. And there were Nazis marching in Florida. He didn't have a ton to say about that. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who have been in, events with neo-Nazis. It is a bit ironic politically, but that is their politics now. It's irony, the politics of irony.
Ron DeSantis, is a walking poster for hypocrisy. We know that. But I would say this. Look, I've spent many years on this network talking about the right's kind of descent into white supremacy and hatred for minorities. But when it comes to the Middle East conflict, there's bigotry all across the spectrum on both sides. Let's be very clear. Some of the left, some of the liberal and Democrats have been very vicious in their anti-Palestinian rhetoric, as have the right. And similarly, as Michelle points out, there are right-wingers who are anti-Semitic, but there's also a lot of people on the left who have said outrageous things about Jews in recent days. That poster from BLM Chicago, which thankfully they've apologized for, which is, as you mentioned, Joy, the paraglider saying, "I stand with Palestine," with the Hamas paraglider. I came on this network the day after the attack, and I said to supporters of Israel, please don't conflate Gaza with Hamas. And I have to find myself on MSNBC now saying to critics of Israel and supporters of the Palestinians, don't conflate Hamas with Palestinians or with Gaza. And I would say this isn't as complicated as people think, right? We can all agree, kids off limits. We can all agree that you can support the people of Gaza and also condemn horrific crimes against people at a concert. This isn't actually that complicated.
Yeah, it isn't. And I will note that BLM chapter is disavowed by the National Black Lives Matter Association. They are not connected at all. Very quick final word to you, Michelle. What can we do differently in our dialogue to be more helpful?
I mean, I just think that people have to remember that these are human beings. There's so much dehumanization, and people, it's very difficult for people to empathize when they are terrified. But I think that that's what this moment calls on people to do.
Yes, marginalized communities standing together always makes the society stronger. Mehdi Hasan, Michelle Goldberg, thank you both. This is an important dialogue. Really appreciate you.